Hello everybody, my name is Robert Ris. I'm a Dutch international master from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I'm recording this DVD for Chess Base here. And the topic of my DVD will be the attacking with the isolated queen pawn. And before I'm going to explain you more about it, it's good to know at least what is an isolated queen pawn. So here in this first position, I've just only set up a couple of pawns just to illustrate the point of my idea. Is that in this position the pawn on d4 is a lonely guy. It is not getting any support from any other pawns in this position anymore, while all the other pawns for both sides, they are nicely connected with each other. So it's always good to know some general ideas, but in general for white it's a problem when he's getting endgames, because in an endgame this isolated pawn can become a target. It's not well defended, and that's why it requires some additional care. So you can either hate it or love it. That's what I always say. And yeah, there are people who like to play with an isolated pawn, and there are people who like to play against an isolated pawn. I have to admit that when I was younger, I always loved to play against the isolated pawn. It was in my style to trade off as many pieces as possible, because that's generally favoring the side playing against the isolated pawn. However, later I realized that it's a little bit biased opinion I had, because I had many endgame lessons in my youth, and that's why I really like to trade off as many pieces as possible and try to exploit that weakness ensuing in the endgame. However, recently I realized that it's not so simple as that, and playing with the isolated pawn offers the side with an isolated pawn great attacking ideas. And why is that so? I think that the pawn on d4, it gives some additional space for white. You have yeah, a little bit more space, and when you get your pieces out, it's easier to bring your pieces towards the black king. So that's what I'm gonna explain you later on. This is just some general information. So what can you expect on this DVD? Well, here we are at the intro, but next I'm going to explain you some typical tactical ideas which you should be able to master when you play with the isolated pawn. I'm gonna show you that in general there are a lot of great ideas for the possessor of the isolated pawn, and basically in most of the cases it's based on some attacks, assaults against the black king. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'm going to examine some tactical exercises. So I'm going to offer you some tests yourself. In total it will be about 40 exercises, and basically they're all about tactics. So in this DVD you will not expect so many positional ideas. Of course they are also involved, but the subject is simply too big to cover it in one DVD. Perhaps one day I will cover some more positional approaches for both sides, or even perhaps playing against an isolated pawn. But in this particular DVD it's just all about tactics. So it's not only about isolated pawn, it's also about improving your tactical skills in general. And I found it pretty interesting myself, the whole process preparing this DVD. I have to admit I never really played with an isolated pawn in my own games. I'm trying to learn the ins and outs, and recently I have been studying the ensuing positions with an isolated pawn, playing with the isolated pawn I mean, and I believe that it's a great asset when you master this type of positions, for several reasons. Because it gives you good dynamic feeling about the possibilities for one side. You're trying to exploit your forces as optimal as possible, and it makes you a more flexible player, as playing with an isolated queen's pawn, it can appear from many openings. There is just the list is simply too big to name them all. But for example, in the Sicilian Alapin, you can play with an isolated pawn. There's in the Caro-Kann variation, the Panov variation, there are lines. So this is starting with 1 e4. But if you're a 1 d4 or knight f3 or 1 c4 player, there are also a lot of openings like the Nimzo Indian, the Queen's Gambit, declined, Queen's Gambit accepted, and many more. For example, the Tarish variation, you can play it with black. So all in all, I have selected just positions from a white's perspective, just to keep it as simple as possible. But it doesn't mean you cannot reach isolated pawns positions with black. As I mentioned, the Tarish variation is a good option, and also the Tarish variation in the French opening after 1 e4. It's a good possibility to play with isolated pawn yourself. But in the majority of the cases, I believe that playing with an isolated pawn with white offers more tactical exercises, possibilities than with black, for the simple reason that white is starting the game, so he is one move ahead in most of the cases, and trying to execute your tactical ideas, it's all about time. If your opponent has time to escape with the king, try to bring defensive pieces to support, then it simply backfires, and usually playing with white you have some time advantage as well. So that's the reason it happens more in positions with white having the isolated queen's pawn. So basically that's what I have compiled in total. So first the intro, this was it. Next some introduction about some general themes, some typical sacrifices possible, some typical ideas to increase the power of your attack, and of course it's all about practicing yourself. So I hope after watching the intro and the general introduction about typical sacrifices, you'll be able to master your tactics, be successful in the tactics yourself, and hopefully you can employ it in your own games as well. And apart from the educational part of this DVD, I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did while recording it. So yeah, have a lot of fun.